Okay, so here we go again. Xbox is dying. Xbox is dead. It's a third-party publisher. We're in the loop again, so I want to talk about it. In the last week, ever since the Xbox Developer Direct, there's been a bit of a media blitz by Phil Spencer and Xbox in general. Namely, he was on two podcasts or did two interviews. One with Gamertag Radio. This is a podcast that's primarily done by Danny Pena and Paris Lilly. They're in their 20th year, which is super cool and very inspiring for someone like myself who has my own podcast that's been going for like almost 6 years now, as well as Destin Laguerre. Destin recently left IGN, and as every other journalist who is leaving their big post at a notable outlet, he started the Patreon and is doing that thing. So these interviews were interesting. I'm an Xbox fan. I'm sure I have a bias. I'm sure I'm got some hopium and copium going on where, I've fully embraced what they're doing at this point. Partially because it's not like I can call up Xbox and be like, hey guys, I don't think this is gonna work. So maybe it's some apathy. But for the most part, I genuinely think what they're doing is smart, especially for them. So let's get into some of the things talked about in these two interviews. What I thought was most notable is I thought Phil looked really great and he seemed really happy. There were those pictures and some interviews that came out late in 2024 where people were like kind of dogging on how Phil looked. They say he all looked sickly and stuff. There's even a games journalist who like really recently beat a cancer diagnosis who called out and said he thought Phil had cancer. That was super weird. I understand, like, if you recently dealt with that, maybe it was a little more personal, and maybe you get a pass for that. I still thought it was kind of strange. But regardless, in these two interviews, Phil looked good. The interviews are interesting because, especially Destin, really tried to hammer in on, like, the community questions, right? And what's so interesting about that is that you see these interviews with Phil and you see the sentiment around, at least the social media, the Reddit, the YouTube game community space, which is a pretty small percentage of gamers, but a very vocal part of that. And both of them, but especially Destin, did the whole Xbox players are worried that you guys are abandoning them, that you aren't going to make more hardware, that Xbox is just becoming a third party and it's losing its identity. And it's when you see these questions being asked, I always think it's funny to watch Phil's face because you can tell he's just like, hey, here we go. Let's just answer this again for the millionth time. Because the sentiment is that they aren't communicating clearly or their strategy is this or that. Obviously these commentaries on strategy and marketing and all this coming from people who don't know anything about those things, who just have opinions and make videos about it, which feels like it hits kind of close to home, but we'll get past that. And I think his message has remained pretty clear. I think Xbox's message has been extremely clear with changes as they've changed things, that as the market changes and as their own needs change and things like that. So he says in both these interviews, our goal is to get our games in as many places as it makes sense, but to still make hardware. One of the things I thought was notable about both interviews, but especially Destin's, was he still feels like it's their job to make competitive hardware, to have the best hardware to play Xbox games and access Xbox services on, whether that be a traditional console, which they've confirmed they're working on. And Sarah Bond threw out the words that may come back to buy him one day of saying it's the biggest generational leap ever. We'll see how that plays out. That was asked about, and Phil danced around it, so I don't think there was any news there. But even in a handheld, that Destin again hit it pretty hard and tried to get Phil to say something, but Phil, being like the most media trained gaming person on earth, is not going to fall for that bait. At one point, if you watch the interviews, I think it was in Destin's, he tried to ask a question about like that, and he just Phil just kind of ha, and then just stared at the camera until he asked another question. It was funny to me. Regardless, that what I would say from both of these interviews, what I'm taking from it at this point, and Phil basically says this, is that Xbox wants to be a platform and a company that makes video games, and they happen to also make hardware. Where if you look at a company like PlayStation right now, and for the last 30 years, they are a company that makes hardware, that makes a console or consoles, and also makes games for that console. And I think what, at least what Xbox's idea is the whole idea of, the thing that makes you money is games as a platform, as a publisher, right? And if that means that people on the outside are going to see them as a third party publisher who happens to make hardware, I don't think Xbox is fighting that. I think the moment they started Game Pass, that was a thing that they were likely realized they were going to have to be willing to do. The whole idea of, Game Pass, it might not make sense. It seems like they're making a ton of money off of it, but you have to have more than just a subscription, right? And so it seems like their strategy is basically to take money from anyone who's willing to give it to them and then use that money to reinvest in their own services to make their own business sustainable. That's why I see all the time, I'll see the sentiment of, these console warriors, and let me be very clear about console warriors. I've probably blocked just as many, if not more, Xbox fanboys as I have PlayStation ones. I think that whole conversation and that whole attitude is so dumb and frustrating. I think it's super cool to have a preference. I have a preference, right? But these people who their only goal in life is to argue with people who like a different plastic corporate box is dumb. But the problem is that these people are still so focused on this whole idea of like, my box better than your box. And here's the games, here's why. Xbox is getting out of that conversation. They, in to some people's opinion, are abandoning that part of their fan base, which is probably not as big as people wish it was or think it is. It's probably fairly small, but it's very vocal online, and you definitely see that. And Phil even reiterated in both of these interviews, he's like, we see the feedback, we see the anxiety, we see the worry, and it seems like they're just kind of trying to like convince people like, just chill, just relax, we got this, we're doing this thing. And there's no guarantee the strategy is going to work, that, putting all their games in as many places as they can do it, there's no guarantee it's going to work. And then they'll probably just change strategy again. Even a year ago when they did the big Doom podcast or whatever you want to call it, and they originally said it was just 4 games. They did Grounded, they did Sea of Thieves, they did Pentiment, and they did Hi-Fi Rush, and they put those on PlayStation. Sea of Thieves did extremely well. Grounded did pretty well. I think it made it to their top 10 sales for a couple months. Pentiment and Hi-Fi Rush, I don't think either of them even charted, which does make their current strategy of putting single player games on PlayStation, even though in those 4 games, the single player games didn't do great. They were also like AA or even indie style games, so maybe it wasn't a good comparison. I suspect Indiana Jones is going to sell pretty well on the PlayStation. I suspect Doom the Dark Ages is going to sell pretty well on the PlayStation. And now it's even expanding, and Phil reiterated it in these interviews, the no red line thing. And what I think is frustrating about that phrase is that, and I think Phil even said, he's like, I made that reference in response to someone talking about a red line. He didn't come up with that organically. So, maybe take that for what it is. But the whole idea of any game could go to any platform, but it doesn't mean they're all going to. And he talks about that as well, is that there will still be Xbox exclusives. There's a decent chance that South of Midnight stays on Xbox forever and never goes to another platform. I think it probably will, but it just comes back to that whole idea, and without rambling too much longer, going back to what I said before, everything that they've said and done, I would argue since the Xbox One, but especially since the series generation, and especially in the last few years, is going back to this idea of them being a gaming platform, a publisher that makes video games. They're likely the biggest publisher in the world now after the ABK acquisition, but also the previous acquisitions. They are going to make as many games and as many good games as they can. They're going to put them out in as many places as they can. And the money they make from that, they're going to reinvest into their own brand and their own platform. And that includes hardware. He talked about it and he alluded to it. This whole idea, and this is how I've seen it too, is that them not necessarily trying to win the console sales race anymore means that they can really focus on trying to put out hardware that's the most convincing hardware possible. They can try to put out hardware that is, maybe it can be a little more expensive. Maybe it won't be $500. Maybe it'll be 6 or 7. Maybe it'll be more expensive than the PlayStation option, because they know they aren't going to outsell the PlayStation. So why not, have the best possible console you can have. Maybe it's a little more expensive. Maybe, how much they can subsidize things, we'll see. But I think them not having to stick in that rat race of trying to always sell more consoles, which they've never done in, 20 years, frees them up to be more creative, whether it's, making their desktop console more powerful in the next gen, whether it's putting out a Series S ish, maybe a little more powerful handheld, and then supporting all the other platforms they're willing to take money from. And so I just really believe that transition of them going from a company that makes hardware that also happens to make games to a company that makes games that also happens to make hardware is likely going to set them up well in the future, and that I think it gives them their best chance of success even in the present day. PlayStation's wiping the floor with them with console sales. PlayStation's also put out less than a handful of first-party exclusive games in the last 3 or 4 years. While now, if you see the roadmap for Xbox, they're going to release, as many, if not more than that, first-party games this year. When it comes to Doom, when it comes to South of Midnight, when it comes to Fable, which is rumored to be basically done, when it comes to games like State of Decay 3 that could come out this year, or even games that they're publishing like Ninja Gaiden 4. They're hitting a cadence. These 50 studios they own are finally starting to put out games. They're doing the thing, and I will trust the giant multinational corporation whose main goal is to make money to make decisions that will go towards that goal. I suggest not putting too much credence into journalists who are looking to get clicks on their article, into influencers who are looking to get clicks on their video, into console warriors who are just looking to interact with people. Sometimes it seems like. My advice is to hear out Xbox, to hear out Phil, and actually listen to the words they're saying, to realize their strategy can change, and that doesn't mean that's not always a bad thing, and to understand that we're in a time of transition, and I'm cool with that, and I hope you are too. Maybe it all fails, maybe it all goes awry. We can't do anything about it, so I say strap in, let's see what happens, and that's kind of where I'm at. Let me know in the comments where you are at with all of this, how you're feeling about it. I highly suggest that you subscribe to the channel if you want more Xbox news or gaming news in general. You can check out all the other content I put out. Hit the thumbs up if you want more people to see this. It does help me out quite a bit. If you really want to support what I do, consider becoming a YouTube member to get videos like this one a little bit early, as well as some other perks. You can check out all of my other content and other ways to support what I do in the links in the description of the video. That is all I have for this one, so until next time.